Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sharing Stories podcast. In this channel, we discuss books. Today, we have Departures by Julian Barnes. And I just want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine opening a highly anticipated new novel by one of the world's greatest living writers.
Right, you're expecting a masterpiece.
Exactly. You turn to the first chapter, you're settling in for a great story, and instead, you were just immediately confronted with this sentence. He says, "As for me, I am now 78, and this will definitely be my last book, my official departure, my final conversation with you."
Wow. Yeah, it's so blunt.
Right. There's no press release. There's no big PR campaign announcing a retirement. It's just this master storyteller explicitly scripting his own permanent exit right there on the page.
It really is a stunning breach of those traditional boundaries between an author and their audience because, normally finality in literature is imposed by circumstance,
Yeah, like an accident or something.
Exactly. An author passes away or their health declines or they just run out of things to say. And readers are just left waiting for a book that never materializes. So to deliberately claim that final word.
And to literally bake it into the narrative.
Yes. To bake that declaration into the very fabric of the narrative itself is just an incredibly rare and honestly provocative act.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is dedicated to unpacking this whole thing.
Bring your book to life with AI. Plotsformovies.com helps you create movie-like trailers for your book, allowing filmmakers to visualize your story, just the way you imagined it while writing. Enhance the storytelling experience to a whole new level with realistic characters, immersive voiceovers, and cinematic sound effects. No more boring stock images or generic clips. Captivate your audience, spark curiosity, make readers and filmmakers eager to explore more. Plotsformovies.com, where your story becomes cinema.
Our mission today is to explore Departures, which is this unconventional and really profound final masterpiece by the Booker Prize-winning author Julian Barnes.
Right. Published right around the time of his 80th birthday in 2026.
Yep. And we're drawing our insights from excerpts of the novel itself. It's a really intriguing blurb. And this whole chorus of genuinely awestruck reviews. We're talking pieces from The Observer, The Times, The Guardian. Basically, we're going to figure out how a literary giant says goodbye.
And the way he goes about it is incredibly complex. He isn't just handing us a standard linear narrative and waving farewell.
Far from it.
Departures actually operates as this deeply philosophical meditation. It looks at memory, the reality of aging, the slippery nature of truth, and that often parasitic relationship between life and literature.
It totally made me think about how people leave parties. You basically have two methods, right?
Oh, yeah. The Irish goodbye.
Exactly. There's the ghosting approach, where you just quietly slip out the back door while everyone is distracted, no fuss. And then you have the theatrical farewell, where you put on your coat, stand in the center of the room, shake every single hand, and announce that you're heading home.
That's a great analogy.
And in the literary world, authors almost always ghost us. But Barnes is standing in the doorway putting on his coat. But before we get to the actual exit, the way he looks back at his time at the party is just fascinating.
It really is. Because to understand the goodbye, we first have to look at that backward glance. The reviewers in The Observer actually categorized this book perfectly. They called it a richly layered autofiction.
Which is such a great term.
It is, because it refuses to sit neatly in one genre. Barnes just seamlessly shifts gears. He goes between traditionally fiction, deeply personal memoir, philosophical essay, and then sharp literary criticism.
And as a reader, that has to be a deliberately disorienting experience.
Yep.
You think you're settling into this cozy narrative arc, and suddenly, bam, you're reading an essay on the physiological realities of aging.
Right. It forces you to stay incredibly alert. And he establishes this demanding tone from the very first page by diving straight into the concept of involuntary memory.
Oh, the Proust stuff.
Yes. He is poking at the foundational assumption of any memoir, which is this idea that we can actually remember our own lives with any real accuracy. And to make his point, he brings up the absolute gold standard of literary memory, which is Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time.
That brings up the famous Madeleine pastry scene, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Barnes meticulously analyzes that famous passage where Proust's narrator, Marcel, has his childhood memories just violently thrown open by a sensory trigger.
It's the tea, right?
Exactly. It's the experience of a Madeleine cake crumbling into a warm cup of lime flower tea. But Barnes zeroes in on a very specific, easily overlooked detail: the physical shape of the Madeleine itself.
Wait, really? What shape is it?
He highlights that it's baked in a mold shaped like a pilgrim's shell.
Oh, wow. A pilgrim shell. So the literal pastry that unlocks his past is shaped like a symbol of a long, arduous journey.
Exactly.
That is a gorgeous literary connection. It's like he is embarking on a pilgrimage into his own history.
Yeah, and Barnes uses that specific image to suggest that venturing into our own past is always a pilgrimage. It requires effort, it requires interpretation, and what we find at the end
Might not actually be the truth.
right, it might not be that holy grail of objective truth we were hoping for.
I want to push back a little on this whole idea of memory being a reliable archive at all, which seems to be exactly what Barnes is getting at. Let's think about this practically.
Okay, let's hear it.
I want you, the listener, right now, to think of a favorite childhood memory you've told at parties a dozen times. Are you actually remembering the raw sensory data of the event? Or are you just remembering the last time you told the story?
Oh, that's a really good point.
To me, human memory feels essentially like a Wikipedia page that we are constantly editing ourselves. The raw event happens, you tell a friend, and you unconsciously smooth out the boring parts to make it a better anecdote.
You add a little flair.
Right. A few years later, you add a punchline. By the time you were 80 years old and looking back, haven't you essentially edited that memory into a piece of highly polished fiction?
You absolutely have.
So if that's true, aren't our autobiographies just elaborate novels we tell ourselves?
That tension right there is the central engine of Departures. Your Wikipedia analogy hits on exactly what Barnes is wrestling with. We are fundamentally unreliable narrators of our own lives.
Because we just keep editing.
Exactly. Every single act of recall is an act of revision. An event from 3 decades ago doesn't just fade. It fundamentally changes shape. It becomes a story.
And stories have rules that real life just doesn't care about.
Precisely. Barnes is laying this groundwork because he wants us to be highly suspicious of the story he is about to tell us. He is examining his own past while simultaneously and very openly transforming it into literature.
Which is wild. Because if our own memories are essentially fictions we construct, that completely changes how we should view the stories we try to construct about other people, too.
Oh, definitely.
And Barnes illustrates the danger of this perfectly when he finally shifts from his own past into the lives of his friends. Because he teases the reader early on, right?
Yeah, he says, there will be a story or a story within a story, but not just yet.
Right. And when the curtain finally rises on this narrative, it revolves around 2 characters from his days at Oxford in the 1960s, Stephen and Jean.
And they represent this classic, almost archetypal pairing of opposites. Stephen is described as deeply thoughtful, somewhat reserved, and intensely devoted.
And Jean is the total opposite.
Right. She's his counterweight, impulsive, restless, carrying this really chaotic sort of energy. And predictably, they fall fiercely in love in their youth.
As you do in a novel.
Exactly. But as they grow older, they hit that inevitable crossroads of early adulthood where a relationship must either formalize into marriage or just fracture entirely.
And they fracture, they break up. But our narrator, who is conspicuously also named Julian, by the way, is just devastatingly affected by this breakup.
He takes it so personally.
He does. He was deeply emotionally invested in their dynamic.
Because he viewed them not just as friends, but as a compelling narrative that he was watching unfold. When they break up, it is as if a novel he was deeply enjoying just ended abruptly in the middle of a chapter.
That's such a writer's problem.
Yeah, it really is. So fast forward several decades. Stephen, who is now an older man, reaches out to Julian. He wants to reconnect with Jean and actually asks Julian to help facilitate it.
And Julian just leaps at the opportunity. He plays the dutiful matchmaker, arranges their reunion, and against all statistical odds, it works. The spark is rekindled, they get back together, and they eventually marry.
It is the ultimate romantic comedy ending.
It really is. It's the sweeping, decades in the making, second chance at true love. It's neat, it's satisfying, and it is exactly the kind of perfect resolution a novelist would write.
Which is exactly the problem.
Yep.
It's a huge problem because Julian fell into the trap of believing that reality operates under the jurisdiction of narrative structure. He treated their lives like a closed mathematical equation.
Like if X plus Y equaled love 30 years ago, it must equal love now.
Exactly. He assumed that carrying over the variables of Stephen and Jean from 30 years ago would yield the exact same result today. But he completely ignored the messy, compounding variables of time, changed personalities, and unspoken resentments.
And so the narrative arc just collapses completely. The sources describe their reunion as a deeply messy, volatile mix. I mean, there is tenderness and intimacy, sure, but it is heavily overshadowed by deep disappointment.
They're just incompatible now.
Right. Jean comes to the painful realization that Stephen loves her in a way she simply cannot reciprocate anymore. So the marriage rapidly deteriorates, and they separate once again. That neat, satisfying ending Julian engineered just blows up in his face.
And Julian's realization here is really the philosophical core of the book. He recognizes that by interfering in their lives, he was actively playing the novelist in the real world.
Which never goes well.
Never. He was trying to force a satisfying, structured, fictional arc onto messy, unpredictable, flesh-and-blood human beings. A writer can easily manufacture neat resolutions on a blank page. Human beings resist that kind of control.
Okay, I have to jump in here, though.
Yeah.
Because I am genuinely struggling with the ethics of Julian's behavior in this section of the book.
It's a trail part.
Yes. Julian explicitly promised both Stephen and Jean that he would never write about their relationship. He gave them his word. But here we are, holding a published book detailing their most intimate failures.
Yeah, he completely betrays them.
I just find myself wrestling with this. When does observing the people we love turn into outright exploitation? Does an author owe their subjects the truth, or basic privacy, or just a really compelling story? He clearly feels guilty about breaking the promise, but he cashes the publishing check anyway.
Your frustration is entirely justified, and honestly, it is exactly the reaction Barnes intends to provoke. He is not letting himself off the hook here.
He knows he's being awful.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the Spectator review points out that this book is a masterpiece of narrative trickery, and the primary target of that trickery is Barnes's own profession. He is brutally interrogating the morality of the writer.
So he is essentially admitting that writers are fundamentally untrustworthy.
Pretty much. He is exploring the idea that a writer's compulsion to observe and record will always eventually override their personal loyalties. The book becomes this tense examination of whether turning real, flawed people into literary characters is an act of deep affection and preservation, or an act of selfish betrayal. And Barnes seems to suggest it is inextricably both.
It is a wild blurring of lines. I mean, the narrator is Julian Barnes. He is reflecting on his very real literary career, his very real medical history, but he is weaving his actual life into this potentially fictionalized portrayal of Stephen and Jean.
And by doing this, he is proving the exact point we discussed regarding memory in the Wikipedia page.
Right.
He learned the hard way that he couldn't control the actual trajectory of Stephen and Jean's real lives, but he can completely control the story he tells the world about their lives. The novelist's ultimate flaw and their ultimate power is that they simply cannot help but turn life into material.
But if Julian is forced to accept that he cannot control the narrative arcs of other people's relationships, that realization acts as a bridge to a much darker, much more immediate truth.
The decline of his own body.
Exactly. He has to confront the reality that he also cannot control his own physical trajectory.
The transition in the text from the failure of human connection to the failing of the human form is incredibly stark. Running parallel to the drama of Stephen and Jean, Barnes is documenting his own personal experiences with severe illness, aging, and the undeniable approach of mortality.
And what I found so striking in the source material is how utterly unromanticized his depiction of death is. So often in literature, mortality is treated as this grand, sweeping, abstract tragedy.
A big dramatic exit.
Exactly. But Barnes strips all the poetry away. He treats dying as a remarkably mundane physical reality. It isn't a grand exit. It is just the quiet, frustrating fading of physical abilities. It is the slow disappearance of your peers.
Which brings us to the introduction of a character that perfectly encapsulates this grounded view of mortality. And it isn't a philosopher or a doctor, it is Jimmy.
Jimmy the Jack Russell Terrier. I have to admit, when I first looked at the outline for this deep dive into a Booker Prize winner's meditation on death, I did not expect an elderly dog to be the emotional anchor of the story.
I know, it sounds a bit out of place, right? Yet Jimmy's presence is one of the most vital components of the novel. Jimmy is Jean's elderly dog, and his steady, undeniable physical decline mirrors the overarching themes of the book perfectly.
It really does.
The blurb of Departures specifically highlights a phrase used to describe Jimmy. It says he is enviably oblivious to his own mortality.
Enviably oblivious. That is a phrase that just sticks with you.
It creates a brilliant thematic contrast, because on one side you have the human cast, Julian, Stephen, Jean. They are entirely consumed by existential dread.
Just constantly worrying.
Yes, they are anxious about their past, terrified of their futures, obsessively trying to curate their legacies and edit their memories. And on the other side, you have Jimmy.
And Jimmy is just experiencing the reality of his hips giving out. There is no philosophical crisis. He isn't worried about how the other dogs at the park will remember him.
Exactly. Barnes uses this elderly terrier to explore the simple biological mechanism of how bodies fail us. It happens through age, through illness, through sudden accident. Bodies weaken, cognitive memories degrade, relationships dissolve, and eventually every single thing must depart.
It is a biological absolute. It is not a failure of narrative structure. It is just the inescapable reality of biology. And watching Jimmy's body weaken and watching Stephen and Jean's relationship end paves the way directly for the ultimate departure of the book.
Which brings us full circle to that incredible scripted farewell we discussed at the start of the show.
Yes, let me read that exact quote from the book again, because hearing it now, after understanding the context of memory and physical decline, it just gives it so much more weight. He writes, "As for me, I am now 78, and this will definitely be my last book, my official departure, my final conversation with you."
He shatters the fourth wall entirely there. There is no narrator shielding him anymore. It is just the author speaking directly to the reader.
He also brings up the writer Brian Moore in this section. Apparently, Moore harbored this deep-seated, terrifying fear of being cut off by death right in the middle of writing a sentence.
That's a very specific writer fear.
Right. And Barnes explains that his decision to finish this final book on his own schedule and to deliberately choose silence afterward is a way of fighting back. He says he is denying agency to death, though in a very minor way, admittedly.
And that specific phrasing, the bold claim followed immediately by a self-deprecating qualification, is the absolute hallmark of Julian Barnes's style.
It really is.
The Observer Review astutely noted that every line is turned inside out with qualifications. By explicitly announcing his exit, he is reclaiming a tiny sliver of control over an uncontrollable process. Death isn't going to barge in and stop him mid-thought. He is firmly placing the period at the end of his own sentence.
And the critical reception to this vulnerability is just stunning. The Times Literary Supplement points out how Barnes assumes this incredibly profound, almost unsettlingly personal relationship with his readers.
Oh, yeah. The TLS review was glowing.
They note that the book is built on a kind of intimacy that Cancer's company doesn't provide. I mean, when his physical world is failing, when his body is betraying him, he turns to the unseen reader for a final moment of deep connection.
And the London Standard captured the tone of this connection beautifully in their review. They described the atmosphere of the book's conclusion as Barnes imagining himself sitting at a quiet pavement cafe, sharing a final drink with his faithful reader, simply watching the world go by.
Just sitting there together.
Exactly. It isn't framed as a tragic, tear-soaked goodbye. It is companionable.
It's a quiet drink before finally heading home. And what absolutely blows me away about this conclusion is the profound modesty of it. You would think that a final intentional book by a literary giant would be a massive, triumphant claim to immortality.
You'd expect a victory lap.
Right. You expect them to shout, "Look upon my legacy."
Mm-hmm.
But the sources emphasize that his conclusion is deliberately small. He acknowledges that what remains isn't a permanent place in the literary canon. It isn't professional achievement. It isn't even a perfectly preserved memory, because as we've discussed, we've spent the whole book establishing that our memories are flawed fictions.
So, after stripping away the illusions of memory, the control of narrative, and the permanence of the body, what does Barnes believe actually remains?
Just the moments that mattered, the specific people we loved, the flawed stories we desperately tried to tell about them, and the brief, fleeting connections we managed to make with other human beings before the clock ran out.
It is a profoundly moving synthesis of a lifetime of writing. The Financial Times noted that at just over 150 pages, the book is quite brief, but it is certainly not slight. They called it a triumphant ending to a legendary career.
And it really sounds like it.
When you pull all of these disparate threads together,
Yeah.
The inherent unreliability of our own memories, the uncontrollable, messy nature of love demonstrated by Stephen and Jean, the grounded biological reality of Jimmy the dog, and Barnes's own deliberate farewell, what you are left with is a masterclass in how to leave the stage gracefully.
Which brings us back to the core mission of this deep dive. If you take anything away from this exploration of departures, let it be this. It is entirely a mistake to read this simply as a book about dying. It is fundamentally a book about paying fierce attention to life, precisely because it ends.
That's beautifully put.
It is an exploration of how we choose to love, and how we must eventually find a way to say goodbye to all of it.
It really serves as a necessary reminder to every single one of us. We are all the primary authors of our own memories. Every day, we are constantly revising the stories of the people we've loved and the people we've lost.
Editing that Wikipedia page.
Exactly. We smooth out the rough edges, we adjust the timelines, and we try desperately to make sense of a plot that was never outlined in advance.
We are all endlessly editing those pages in our heads. Which leaves us with a final lingering question. It's drawn straight from the themes of the book's blurb, and it is something I want you, listening right now, to carry with you today.
Let's hear it.
If our raw experiences inevitably degrade into polished anecdotes and then eventually fade into highly subjective fictionalized memories, does it actually matter if what we remember really happened exactly that way?
That's a big question.
Or does it only matter that it mattered enough to us to be remembered at all? Next time you find yourself at a party, getting ready to put on your coat, stand in the doorway, and make your own departure, ask yourself what version of the night's story you will choose to tell tomorrow.
A perfect thought to leave on.
Absolutely. And before we let you go, we at sharingstories.in are showcasing books by Indian authors through the hashtag Pushing Indian Authors campaign.
Which is such a great initiative.
It really is. And this content is supported by plots4movies.com, an AI-enabled book trailer platform where you can watch a 1-minute trailer of the book to understand it better before you buy it.
Very cool tool.
So please consider subscribing and supporting the channel. We urge you to buy this book and read it from the link in the description. Also, be sure to drop a comment below with your favorite book by an Indian author. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.